the prestigious Harvard Law School auditorium fell into an electric hush when Supreme Court Justice Elena Kagan abruptly departed from her prepared remarks and delivered an unexpectedly sharp critique aimed directly at Representative Jasmine Crockett. The annual Distinguished Lecture on Congressional Power Dynamics had drawn an overflowing audience of law students, faculty, and legal professionals eager to witness a rare panel featuring both a sitting Supreme Court justice and the freshman Texas Congresswoman, examining how power flows between branches of modern American government. Midway through the discussion, Justice Kagan pivoted and declared with her signature precision, "Representative Crockett, I need to challenge your earlier characterization of our court's recent Commerce Clause decisions." She continued, asserting that Crockett had implied the court's rulings stemmed from political ideology rather than constitutional interpretation, and questioned whether a more honest assessment would acknowledge that Congress itself had increasingly abandoned its constitutional responsibilities by drafting ambiguous legislation that delegates fundamental policy decisions to administrative agencies, effectively forcing courts to draw boundaries lawmakers should have defined from the outset. This reframing, placing responsibility on congressional overdelegation rather than judicial activism, directly confronted Crockett's earlier critique of Supreme Court decisions limiting federal regulatory authority. For nearly 40 minutes, the panel had maintained the measured civility typical of academic forums, until Crockett, responding to a question about agency power, had carefully criticized what she described as selective originalism in Commerce Clause interpretation. Her concern, she explained, was not legitimate disagreement over regulatory limits, but the court's inconsistent use of historical standards that constrained congressional authority, while simultaneously expanding judicial power derived from the same constitutional text, creating the perception that constitutional analysis was being shaped by desired outcomes rather than principled consistency. That observation clearly struck a nerve with Justice Kagan, whose own jurisprudence reflects sensitivity to both judicial overreach and administrative expansion. The resulting moment of tension, rare in academic settings where sitting justices are seldom challenged so directly, left the room completely silent as Crockett prepared to respond. Though only in her first term, Crockett had already earned a reputation as a serious legal thinker, but responding effectively to a challenge from a justice of Kagan's stature presented an entirely different level of difficulty. She paused, steadied her notes, and met Kagan's gaze with composed focus, beginning with genuine deference. "Justice Kagan, I appreciate the substance of your challenge. You've identified a legitimate concern about congressional drafting, and Congress absolutely bears responsibility for the current imbalance." She acknowledged her own advocacy for clearer legislative language to reduce excessive regulatory interpretation, a concession that immediately shifted the exchange from confrontation to dialogue. She then continued, calmly but precisely, that both branches face parallel institutional challenges requiring mutual accountability, rather than unilateral blame. Just as Congress must legislate with greater precision, she argued, courts should consider whether selectively applying historical limitations to modern commerce power, while expanding judicial review beyond founding-era constraints, creates the very inconsistency undermining constitutional legitimacy. Citing Gibbons versus Ogden, she noted that Chief Justice Marshall described commerce power as complete in itself and exercisable to its fullest extent, an understanding that prevailed for over a century before modern restrictions emerged, constraining congressional authority based on originalist reasoning, while allowing judicial authority to evolve beyond historical limits, she argued, reflects a methodological imbalance. With carefully measured force, Crockett concluded that neither branch has maintained perfect historical fidelity. Congress has often legislated too broadly, while courts have frequently interpreted beyond original boundaries. Acknowledging this shared evolution, she suggested, may be the key to restoring institutional equilibrium. Constitutional legitimacy, she emphasized, depends on principled consistency rather than outcome-driven flexibility, a standard that must apply equally to lawmakers and judges alike. As she finished, the auditorium remained silent, the tension giving way to recognition that something rare had occurred. A junior congresswoman offering a substantive, respectful, and methodologically grounded constitutional critique that neither diminished the court nor surrendered congressional responsibility. Justice Kagan's expression reflected thoughtful consideration, and observers would later describe the exchange as an extraordinary moment of institutional dialogue, one that transformed an academic panel into a defining conversation about constitutional coherence and democratic legitimacy.